Is this on? To the left is green.
Yeah.
Green is on.
Yeah.
Green is
So
on.
can you,
Green is on. Okay. Testing. Oh, that's just weird. Come on down. You can hear better down here. Is this working? Anybody hearing this? Yeah, I can hear it now. What? Ah. Okay. That's about it? Okay. All right. Y'all are more than welcome to come down here.
here, let me see. I think you're.
Upside down?
Yes, yeah. Here,
Oh.
that might help.
Oh.
So now.
So they were hearing everything backwards.
Yeah, yeah, okay. Now we're cooking. All right.
Okay. And everybody can hear that, huh? Good. Huh? I hope not. I mean, I hope I am. It's green.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. It just feels like it's quiet.
But it is quiet.
Hey, Dylan, can you turn him up just a tad? What? Yeah, he's on mine.
Trying that. Is that better? All right, we're going to start. There we go. Anyone have any prayer requests? No? That's good. Yeah, that's a lot better than the first one was. Yeah. I'm Tim Hempel, one of the elders, one of the two Tim H's here. And the elders have been assigned the task of going through James here in the next few weeks. And so I am going to be addressing the passage from James chapter 1, verses 1 through 8. James is so interesting to me because in this passage he introduces himself as a servant or a slave of God and of the Lord Jesus Christ. And I just wonder about what was that amazing journey that took him from being this half-brother, biologically, of Jesus, who probably had to listen his whole childhood to both his parents telling him, listen to your big brother. He's God, so he knows what he's talking about. How he went from that journey of being this doubter to one of the men that wrote the letter of James. It has to be an amazing story. There's a lot of people, when I get to heaven, I want to ask them a lot of questions. So he was the younger half-brother of Jesus, and he was writing to the 12 tribes scattered among the nations. For us, even though James was writing to early Christians, Jewish Christians, his message is directly applicable to us today. And for a starter, I want to read a passage out of Proverbs 3, verses 5 and 6 that directly tells us how to apply what James is going to be talking about. In Proverbs 3, verses 5 and 6, it says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways, submit to him, and he will make your path straight." And then in the passage from James 1, verses 1 through 8, James writes, "James, a servant of God and of the Lord Jesus Christ, to the 12 tribes scattered among the nations, greetings. Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. If any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you. But when you ask, you must believe and not doubt, because the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea, blown and tossed by the wind. That person should not expect to receive anything from the Lord. Such a person is double-minded and unstable in all that they do." Couple notes of interest here before we start. James wasn't telling us what to do at this point. He was just saying, give this some thought, consider it. Consider it pure joy whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing your faith produces perseverance. And does he say, if you face trials? Or does he say whenever? Are Christians immune to trouble, to sickness, to emotional problems, to spiritual struggles, financial struggles? No. There are some teachers who would tell you that you're a weak Christian if you're struggling with any of those, but that's a lie, straight from Satan. So he says, whenever. And then he doesn't say, come inside the church building, and if somebody asks you how you're doing, put on that church happy face and just say, oh, everything's great. Because it's not always great, is it? Doesn't matter what our age is, we're going to go through some trials. And some of them are hard. Some of them are really hard. So he doesn't tell us how to do it, but just to think instead, get a different perception of what we're going through. There are all kinds of troubles, trials, like I said, spiritual, physical, emotional, relational. This time of year especially. Thanksgiving through Christmas is one of the hardest times of the years for people, for families, for relationships. It's just a hard struggle because a lot of things are not resolved, and yet we're trying to put on this Merry Christmas, happy face. Doesn't always work, does it? Everyone has and will experience trials of many kinds. And we've seen that here right in our own church family. The loss of our spouses, family members, children, sickness, cancer, you name it. There's somebody in this family that has experienced that. And yet we're told by James, consider this just to be a pure joy that you can even go through these things. So there must be a reason. There must be a reason. Trials are never welcome. Sometimes they're overwhelming. And I shared in the earlier class, I can tell you that I don't think that in the middle of things I have ever considered it a pure joy. 2016, for example, was one of the worst years of my life. I lost a son to ALS. I lost a wife to cancer. And I was not considering it a pure joy. You ever been overwhelmed by your situation? It's easy, isn't it? But we have examples of people that even though they were overwhelmed, they persevered. Remember the story that Garrett gave? Job? If anyone had an overwhelming experience, he did. And then on top of that, his good friends, if you can call them that, what was their counsel? Well, you must have some secret dark sin you haven't confessed, and this is your fault. And then his wife, his helpmate, what was her counsel? This is terrible. Why don't you just give up, curse God, and die? Well, that's encouraging, isn't it? Yeah. In spite of dubious friends and discouraging helpmate, though, Job did not relinquish his trust in God, did he? He kept his faith. We can learn from our trials. At least that's what James says. He says, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work so that you may become mature and complete and not lacking anything. What does it mean to persevere? Anybody got a definition? Yep. There was a preacher back in the 80s. His definition of persevere was to keep on keeping on. Putting one foot in front of the other, in other words. And sometimes that's what it takes. Because the alternative is to go in a closet and curl up into a ball and give up, right? Persevere. The Bible definition says or promotes the idea of steadfastness, being steadfast under pressure, enduring in the face of our trials. And sometimes it can be an endurance. And it doesn't necessarily get easier with age. Trials put us in a situation where it's not easy to keep going, where we will only do so with a measure of determination. A mindset, in other words, to determine to be determined. Keep on, keeping on. So what can trials do for us? James apparently is telling us there is some benefits to this. You ever heard the saying, what doesn't break you will make you? Yeah. God gives us an example in nature. Look at the trees. You get these huge trees that you can't even put your arms around. But that tree, in order to grow stronger, had to grow up with winds blowing it back and forth. And it actually causes a physical change to the structure of the fibers in the tree. So the branches, the trunk, everything becomes stronger. And without that stress, If they got big enough, they'd collapse under their own weight. Our human bodies are similar. What happens when you go to the gym and work out? Ah! Yeah. The idea is that when you break down your muscle tissue after it recuperates, it's stronger. Whether that's weights, walking, running, swimming, it makes our body stronger. And that's true from a spiritual sense too. When we learn to persevere, how does that work? James says we can gain maturity in our faith. He tells us perseverance or will, not maybe, produce maturity in our faith. So how do we do that? How do we persevere? How do we keep on keeping on? Perseverance teaches us something, because we can never do any of this on our own, can we? What did that Proverbs saying say? You have to trust in God. He's our source of strength. So we persevere by giving it up to God, not giving up, but giving it up to God, surrendering. And if we're prideful, what does pride say? I can handle this on my own. I don't need anybody's help, and I certainly don't need God's help. So it requires humility. We may not think we're prideful, but if we're not willing to just turn it over to God in the first place, we're being prideful, aren't we? So you learn to persevere by learning to trust in God. Also, just as important, trusting in our fellow Christian brothers and sisters. Isn't that what all this is about? We come together. It doesn't matter where we come from, what our background is, culturally or anything. We come together. There's one thing we have in common, right? Christ and the cross. So James says, get a different perspective. Consider it a pure joy when things happen. Somebody asked in the earlier class, well, how do you describe pure joy? And the first thing that popped to my mind when I was first reading this was, remember the story of Paul and Silas? Arrested, beaten, thrown into prison. They're in shackles. And the first thing they did was got out their notepad and started writing all their complaints, right? Because they were going to file a human rights issue here, right? Is that what they did? They started singing praise to God. I'm thinking that must have been pure joy right in the middle of it. It's a spiritual mindset. There's another benefit of trials besides making us stronger. How many times have you come across somebody struggling with whatever kind of issue, and you think, oh, I've been through that? Do we use that experience to give them encouragement? Because that's where we learn. We should have learned something from our time, from how we came out of that, or if we're still going through it. So the lesson that we learn is that we can have the ability to give encouragement and support to each other. That's pretty important, isn't it? And there's nothing that's too little for God, so there should be nothing that's too little or too big for us to share and lean on others around us for. there's a phrase that James uses to stir up one another. And I'm thinking, that sounds like cheerleaders. What do? They definitely stir up the crowd, don't they? Which in turn stirs up the players to play harder. So what we've learned from our trials, we can use to be cheerleaders for somebody else. And we need each other, don't we? Yeah.
I was just reading in this commentary message, and it says, it's a little bit more in our language, consider it sheer gift, friends, when tests and challenges come at you from all sides. You know that under pressure, your faith life is forced into the open and shows its true colors. So don't try to get out of it prematurely. Let it do its work so you become mature and well-developed, not deficient.
Yeah.
Don't try to shortchange it.
No. Yeah, because we can then have this attitude like a past elder here who was dearly loved by everybody. His name was David Snow. If that sounds familiar, that's Gary Snow's dad. He was dying. And his comment was, hey, if I live, I win. If I die, I win. Now, I think that was an attitude of joy right there. And that was almost 30 years ago, but that still comes to my mind anytime I start to, oh, poor me. Anybody remember the story of the Lone Ranger? He used to be on TV. He was one of the great cowboy series of my childhood. Lone Ranger was dying, wasn't he? And a man by the name of Tonto found him, rescued him, brought him back to health, and became his lifelong companion. And they worked together fighting evil. Because nobody can be a Lone Ranger, especially a Lone Ranger Christian. And I was told by one of my own stepsons one time that, well, I don't need to be in church. You know, I can worship right up here in the mountains in Colorado and, you know, just sit under a tree and, well, I guess that's true to a point. You can worship God anywhere. But you need other people for strength, for support, for encouragement, for them to be a cheerleader to you, for you to be a cheerleader to them. Did Jesus establish the church to be a new club? Trick question, huh? He established it because he knew we could not survive alone. We need him, but we need each other. There's strength in numbers. How many times have you heard that? Strength in numbers. And our faith can be strengthened through others. In Hebrews, the writer says in chapter 10, verses 21 through 25, and since we have a great priest over the house of God, let us draw near with a true heart in full assurance of faith, with our hearts sprinkled clean from an evil conscience and our bodies washed with pure water. Let us hold fast the confession of our hope without wavering, for he who promised is faithful. Let us consider how to, here we go again, stir up one another in love and good works, not neglecting to meet together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day drawing near. stirring up, encouraging, cheerleaders. When we learn to rely on God and fellow believers, we're strengthened spiritually. I think even mentally. And James is going to address something to that effect here in just a little bit. So what should we be doing when we're tested or in a trial? When we get that doctor that says, I've got bad news for you. Or all of a sudden, economically, things fall out for you. Or socially, because you're a Christian, you become a pariah. That can happen. It can happen. James first counsels us to consider how to think, get a new perspective when we're in the middle of our trials, and then he shows us how to react and what to do when we are in the thick of it. You ever been in one of those situations, physically, mentally, spiritually, financially? Seems like the whole world has just crashed in. And what do we do? You ever felt hopeless, helpless? Maybe even been angry at God? I was there in my younger years. You ever despaired of life itself? There seems to be a lot of people today in our age now that have just despaired. Choose to take their own lives, which does not solve anything, especially for those that remain behind. And then in the middle of all this despair or helplessness or hopelessness, you start to feel guilty because I'm a Christian. If I'm a good Christian, I won't feel this way. Is that right? I had a radio preacher I've listened to a lot, especially when I was going to work in the mornings, which has been a while, but he would say, when you hear lies like that, they smell like smoke. And they smell like smoke because they come from the pit of hell. God understands when we're feeling helpless, hopeless, uncertain, asking the big why question. He's big enough to handle that. He even answered Job, didn't he? Job didn't get the answer he wanted, but I've always thought that particular story was kind of humorous because it was kind of like, by the time I got through telling him that he'd explain the why, if Job could explain this and that, Job went kind of, oh, sorry, my bad, you know. But Job never gave up his faith, though, did he? He persevered. And we can too. It says in the story of Job that Job was a righteous, devout man of faith, so much so that Satan begged God to allow him to test Job's faith. He was going to break him, wasn't he? And that did not happen. And like I said earlier, Job's friends were of no help. His wife was of no help. But Job persevered. He kept on, keeping on. David, this mighty man, the all-time king as far as the Israelites were concerned, he certainly had ups and downs, sometimes to the point of despair. At one time before he was king, King Saul was trying to kill him. After he was king, a time came when one of his sons was trying to kill him. And he despaired. But he never gave up on God. He always brought everything to God, didn't he? Good lesson for us. And these weren't fictional characters. These were real characters in history. And they persevered because Job praised God, and David's response in all these trials was to go to God in prayer. He wrote in one of his Psalms 25, verses 4 and 5, "Show me your ways, Lord. Teach me your paths. Guide me in your truth and teach me." So in spite of all that was going on, David had the wisdom to ask God for help. It takes, as I said earlier, it takes humility to ask for help. Because pride says, I don't need any help. That's why James tells us in verse 5, if anyone lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you. Somebody pointed out again in the earlier class, he doesn't necessarily answer all our prayers, though. I said, I think he does. Just sometimes we don't hear the answer we want because the answer is no. Because God knows what's good for us and what we really need. And it takes some wisdom to know that we need God's wisdom, don't we? That's why we need to rely on God through His Word, through Holy Spirit living in us, and yes, through each other, being each other's cheerleaders, counsel. We should never be afraid to let somebody know that we're having a struggle. How can they help if they don't know what it's about? I really believe in the 25 years that I worked with my coworker, we really believe that praying is good, but praying specifically, if you know what the situation is about, that's much better. Because then we become a cheerleader for that person, even in our prayers. Humility causes surrender. If you're too prideful, you're not going to surrender, are you? If you're too prideful, you're not going to ask for help. You won't even ask God for help if you're too prideful. Surrender does not leave room to doubt the result of our prayers. Surrender is not giving up. It's merely asking for help and believing God can help. And surrender is a challenge. Surrender, sometimes we fool ourselves into thinking that we're surrendering to God's will, but we're really not. And again, from my own life, I can tell you that in the last 3 months of my wife's dying of cancer, my prayers every night was, first of all, that she would rest well, but I was also asking God to heal her. And I meant in this life. But I knew I was supposed to be putting this all in God's hands, in His will. And so I would add to my prayer every night, oh, your will in all this, God. I didn't mean it. I didn't mean it. I knew what I wanted. I knew what I was asking for, and I did not mean surrender. And one night in the middle of that prayer, I was over by her side of the bed, and I was standing, and all of a sudden I started hyperventilating. I could not breathe. My heart was beating so fast, I could feel it about to come out of my mouth, I thought. And I just literally lost the ability to even stand up. And it dawned on me. I said, my prayers were all wrong. I wasn't surrendering anything. And I said, okay, God, it's yours. It's all yours. Your will. And it was like immediately a calm came over me. I could breathe again. My heart rate was normal. And I had a peace that I didn't have before. That's what surrender does. If we don't have to do the battle by ourselves, if we don't have to solve the problem all by ourselves, if we don't have to have all the answers, because we never have all the answers. The world thinks it does, which is why James, in this whole letter, is talking about wisdom. You know, the world's wisdom. There's a lot of knowledge out there, isn't there? Just open up your phone if you don't think so. You also have to determine what's really true and what's really not, but there's all kinds of knowledge out there. But God's knowledge, God's wisdom, that's something we can rely on. James said when we ask God, God will give generously, because his desire is to be generous to all his children. So why in these passages do you think then that James turns around in the middle of all this, or at the end of this perhaps, and addresses the subject of doubt? Have you ever doubted anything? Your choices? Maybe even God? You know, and we go, but you know what? God's big enough to understand even that. James says we have to be discerning as to the source of that wisdom, don't we? Worldly wisdom may be of help. I mean, there's medical things that we know today that we didn't know even 10 years ago. But if we take the counsel of people living in the world on how to resolve our problems, we're going to be in deeper trouble than we were before. Apostle Paul addressed that too, the self-wisdom of the world. 1 Corinthians 3, Paul says in verse 18, do not deceive yourselves. If any of you think you are wise by the standards of this age, you should become fools so that you may become wise. For the wisdom of this world, is foolishness in God's sight. This age, we're in this age. It's been 2,000 years, but we're still in this age. And the world will tell you, oh, we know it all. We have all the answers. No. You want the real answers? We have the Bible. We have God. We have Holy Spirit to guide us. And we have each other. Goes back to that no Lone Ranger Christians, doesn't it? We need each other desperately. But there were some then, even like there is now, that tried to have it both ways, you know. I'm a Christian, but, you know, I really love this part out here. I had a young relative say they were going to such and such church because they had been betrayed in a previous experience, and so they were trying out Christian Light. I don't know what that is. But they didn't want to get real deeply committed. They just wanted to try some Christian light. I'm going to have to ask her more about that later. 'Cause I think I understood where she was coming from, but there was a people in one of the letters in Revelation, Church of Laodicea, that apparently was trying to do Christian light, straddling the fence, lukewarm. It's easy just to kind of relax your guard and sit back and, okay, I'm attending church Sunday. That should be good enough for this week. Check that box, go home. Fence straddlers. You heard the phrase, hedging your bets? I really believe this will work, but this might work too. So let me try that. As a farm boy, I have straddled fences. We had hog farm, dairy cattle, chickens. The hog pen had 2x6 rails across the top and the bottom to keep the hog wire in place. And I thought it was a great trick to be able to get up on that 2x6 and walk from one end of the pen down to the other. And you usually made it, or at least I usually did, because if you fell on one side, you're going to fall in all that pig slop. The other side was hard ground. But straddling the fence was a difficult thing. If we try those kind of gymnastics mentally and spiritually, we straddle the fence. And what does James say about that? That kind of a person. That they should not expect to receive anything from the Lord. Such a person is double-minded and unstable in all they do. The person who seeks both God's wisdom and the world's wisdom will have neither and will be spiritually unstable. Finally, back to Proverbs. Trust in the Lord. In Psalms 46, verse 1, God is our refuge and strength, our ever-present help in time of trouble. So if our anchor is God, we have the ultimate help, don't we? Because God is unchanging. He was, He is, He always will be. Unchanging, ever-present. That's where we need to put our hope, our trust, our confidence. As individuals and as a whole. Anyone got any comments? Ooh, good timing.
Well, I think if you don't have an anchor, well, taking the example we have right here, they talk about the ocean a lot, because that was means of transportation.
Yeah.
It's familiar to them. But if you don't have a sail that's set, or if you don't have an anchor to be steadfast, you are adrift.
Yeah.
You'll just be taken anywhere. And that's how we can be if we don't have our anchor or our set.
Yeah.
With God, is that we can be, we're just adrift, is what we are.
Yeah.
Anything can sway us, we can believe anything. So I think that's a good example for us, is you need that anchor, you need that sail set going the right direction.
Yeah.
And I think whenever he talks about like doubt, we were kind of touching on that a little bit. It's like I think there's a big difference between what James is writing about here about doubt and like wrestling with things. It's like there are things in the Bible that are going to challenge you, and that might spark what we might consider as doubts. I think James here is more talking about I think the connection, because he's talking about trials and then goes into doubts.
Yeah.
I think the connection is clear. That's like, because when do you doubt God the most? When you're going through a bunch of stuff.
Yeah. I've been a good Christian. Why are you doing this to me?
Yeah,
Yeah,
why,
yeah.
and so it's like, I think what he's talking about is like, if you continue to doubt God's goodness, because he talks about the generosity that God bestows, like the wisdom, like he will give generously to you, unless you doubt that he's that good.
Yeah.
And I think that's what he's talking about, is like trying to pick, a lot like what you were saying, I want God's wisdom right here, which is a little bit, because I don't think he's got the full picture.
Yeah.
Because
Oh,
he wants
and
to
this
do
looks
more
good.
stuff too.
Yeah.
Yeah, so James uses strong language, and that's why we love him, but also it can almost give you the wrong message. Like, so if I ever doubt ever I'm a bad
Yeah.
Christian, I don't think that's what he's saying.
No. No. Any other comments, thoughts? Well, in the process of writing this lesson for about the 6th time on this right here, I learned a lot. I learned a lot. I hope you can take something from this. Appreciate your time. Okay.
You're welcome to stay and sing to practice for Sunday.
Oh, so you can let it ride.
Oh.
Oh, man, yeah, that's probably a pretty good.
Oh.
Oh.
Mm.